Daily Bible Time, Dominic Steele, Friday morning, 23rd of December. Today we're returning to humanity. We're on a journey through Christopher Watkin's 22-chapter book, Biblical Critical Theory, and he's really taking us through a biblical theological approach to the Bible, but stopping off on the way and interacting with different philosophers and what they have said on these topics as we go through. The approach we've taken is to look first at the end of chapter questions that we're given. In what way are Adam and Eve like the other creatures in Genesis 1 and 2? In what ways are they different? And this quote from Thomas Hobbes, the value or worth of a man is as of all other things his price. That is to say, so much as would be given for the use of his power. And the contrast, they said, well, Watkin says, is contrast Thomas Hobbes' understanding of human worth with the biblical account of human worth. The big subject headings in this chapter are the image of God and fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea, and then there's a whole stack of minor subject headings under that. There's a fascinating little story at the very beginning of an ape approaching the lectern. It's from 1917, from a guy called Franz Kafka. An ape approaches the lectern, a hush descends over the expectant audience, Red Peter clears his throat, begins to give his report to the assembled learned academy on my former life as an ape. The details are sketchy, he can find no human words to express what it was like to live as a non-human primate. What about his new life as a man? Well, he drains a bottle of alcohol with ease. Like the other humans, he's learnt to spit and smoke a pipe like the other humans. He exacts petty revenge on those he dislikes with small acts of cruelty. Like the other humans, he has his way with the female chimps, just like the other male humans do. He can only conclude that his assimilation into human society has been a resounding success. Now, that short story, a report to the Academy, just like the Planet of the Apes films, have they attempt to deal with, as Watkin says, our endless fascination with human exceptionalism. What is it that makes us different? And the Bible's big answer to this in Genesis 1 and again in Genesis 2 is that as men and women, we are created in the image of God. All other creatures created according to their kinds. We are created differently. And the clear linguistic markers, God said, let there be, there was. They were created according to their kinds, the birds of the air, the fish of the sea, the animals. And yet we have this extraordinary line, let us create in our image. It's only humanity that is created in the image of God. We are still, God is on the creator. If you think of the distinction between creator creation, God of course is on the creator side of that. We're part of the creation, but we are separate somehow to all the other creatures. Little excursus on the let us, and what does that mean? Is it a hint of the Trinity? Is it the royal we? Is it something caught up with Elohim, a plural form of El meaning God? Whatever it is, it is striking that it's used in Genesis 1, says Watkin, only for the creation of human beings. And human beings are the only creatures referred to in the plural. There's an interesting thing that the climax of Genesis 1 and 2 is the man speaking. We start Genesis 1 with God speaking, we finish, and the climax of Genesis 1 is rest. The climax of Genesis 2 is the man saying, wow, this is now bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man. That's the crescendo of Genesis 2. On the in our image, and Watkin says when he was writing his book on the human being in modern French philosophy, he took 539 pages of notes on the image of God motif just on what the philosopher Jean-Luc Marion said. And he said, I only stopped at 539 pages because he ran out of time. Every theologian in the history of the church has a major take on this issue of the image of God, and it is such a significant term. You think about the secular philosophers. John Locke says, what is it that separates humanity from the other animals? John Locke says it's understanding. Rousseau says it's not so much understanding, but the human quality of free agency. Tocqueville says the particular characteristic that is peculiar to humanity alone is that we improve ourselves and the other creatures do not. John Stuart Mill says it's It's our ability to be capable first of sympathizing, not just with other humans apart from our offspring, but with all other sentinel animals, all other sentinel beings, and also in having a more developed intelligence which gives a wider range to the whole of their sentiments, whether self-regarding or sympathetic. Darwin, on the other hand, Charles Darwin, he dismisses many of the hypotheses concerning human exceptionalism, arguing that the difference in mind between man and the higher animals, great as it is, certainly is one of degree, not of kind. Now, so you got, yes, there's this particular trait, whatever it is, that singles us out to be different to the animals, or Darwin, on the other hand, saying there's no real difference, it's only a small difference. Third option is people pin human exceptionalism on you having a particular trait. Third option, which doesn't pin human exceptionalism on you having one particular trait, nor denying it altogether, has been to argue that human beings are unique precisely because we don't have a fixed nature like the other animals. Rather, we develop and change ourselves over time, growing both in outward trappings of technology and in our inner lives as well. Watkin says whatever precisely it means to be in the image of God, whether it's substantial, like standing on 2 feet, functional, like being in charge of and caring for the creation, or relational, like being created male and female, it is something given by God, not something that humanity performs and then presents to God expectant of a reward. That God makes us different. He says that is significant. Little excursus, he says, from Frankenstein through to the Terminator franchise, the idea of human beings making sentient creatures in our image has haunted our social imaginations. And as genetic and other technologies improve, there are prospects of making post-human or transhumans with improved capacities. That's becoming more realistic, and there's a little excursus on how do these myths and developments relate to the image of God in Genesis 1. Gregory of Nyssa says one aspect of the image of God is that human beings are made in the image of the incomprehensible, which means that unlike other creatures we have no fixed nature. Pascal, he says humanity infinitely transcends humanity, constantly changing and outstripping our former limits through progress in knowledge and technology. Chesterton says we talk of wild animals, but man is the only wild animal. It is man that has broken out. All other animals are tame animals following the rugged respectability of the tribal type. All other animals are domestic animals. Man alone is ever undomestic, either as a profligate or a monk. Peter Berger has a similar idea in a more prosaic term. Unlike the other higher mammals who are born with essentially completed organism, man is curiously unfinished at birth, and men are congenitally impelled to impose meaningful order on reality. Sartre gives the idea the existential twist. If indeed existence precedes essence, one will never be able to explain one's action by reference to a given and specific human nature. In other words, there is no determinism. Man is free, and man is freedom. Now, the Bible, says Watkin, would not endorse all these ways of understanding humanity, but there is a sense in the flow of the biblical narrative after Genesis 1 that human beings do progressively change their environment and living conditions, and that these changes transform human beings themselves. Unlike all the other animals, we do not stay where we were as a species. C.S. Lewis goes on to examine, well, what counts as improvement? What counts as progress? And who decides what counts as improvement and progress? Well, of course, it can't be anyone else other than us, human beings in our current state. But these are the very humans who need improving. So on what basis should we trust our own judgment about what aspects of humanity should be improved? I jumped down to reflections on the image of God, and taken together, these two motifs, image and of God, says what can prevent us from falling into two opposite and equally pathological ways of understanding humanity. image reminds us we are not self-contained, we are not the final reference point, and that we are the image of God. That keeps us from making too much of ourselves. A majestic sunset is not in the image of God, nor is a breathtaking beach, a rainforest, a radiant sunset, or a raging waterfall only one creature in the vast cornucopia of creation's diversity is dignified with this honour. You and me and every human being, from the richest and grandest to the poorest and lowliest. The twin dangers, as C.S. Lewis points out. Aslan, as he addresses Prince Caspian, you come of both Lord Adam and Lady Eve. That is of both an honour enough to erect the head of the poorest beggar and shame enough to bow the shoulders of the greatest emperor. The image of God motif hits the reset button both for those who think of themselves of supreme worth and both for those who think of themselves of too small worth. We shouldn't make too much of being in the image of God or too little. I jump down to the big heading, fill the earth and subdue it. All the creatures are told to be fruitful, increase in number, but only Adam and Eve are told, subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, over every other living creature. Now that is very interesting. We are to rule. Now, no shrub has yet appeared on the ground. No shrub has yet sprung up. And that's fascinating. There's no one to work the ground and no shrubs on the ground. God's intention from the beginning was that the ground would need to be worked. The ground was created in a state of to be worked from the outset. That's not a defect in creation. God leaves us in no doubt. Genesis 1 is very good. Al Waters says, earthly creation preceding the events recorded in Genesis 3 is like a healthy newborn child. It can be said to be very good, but change is required. Nancy Guthrie summarises the creation account is that Eden is unspoiled but also unfinished, and God co-opts Adam and Eve to participate in his creative work, making sure that creation has left room for them to flex their muscles of dominion and rulership. There's naming of the animals, establishing rule there. There's actually that naming issue introduces the concept of language. Language is not just about naming, it's also about power. The party that has the naming rights over the terms of the debate is likely to win the debate. We see that with the clash between the terms illegal immigrants and asylum seekers to describe the same people. And Sam Alinsky, in his manifesto, Rules for Radicals, says, he who controls the language controls the masses. Now, that might be an exaggeration, but if it is, only a little exaggeration. Then a discussion on fill, subdue and rule. And the question is really, what's the responsibility of humanity and what's the obligation of humanity in fill, subdue and rule? And does it mean exploit the world? Does it mean venerate the world? Or does it mean care for the world? There's an article by Lynn White in 1967. He blames the Christian tradition for the damaging attitude to the environment. But T.S. Eliot says a wrong attitude towards nature will imply a wrong attitude towards God. And if you actually have a right attitude to God, then you'll end up having a right attitude to God's creation. To give it to you quickly, to treat trees as merely facts is to act as if God was nowhere to be seen. That is an attitude at home in Genesis 3 when sin enters the world, but not in the Bible's opening 2 chapters. But to treat trees as somehow sacred, well, that gives you no consistent criteria for choosing between the aspects of the world that should be treated as sacred and those that should not be treated as sacred. Rather, we are to care for the world. There's a whole lot more to be said, and Watkin puts it really well, and I'm going to leave it there. Thanks for joining us on Daily Bible Time today. See you tomorrow, or see you Monday morning, Boxing Day. God bless.